Turn in your Bibles, if you will, to Daniel chapter 1. Charles handed out a few moments ago kind of an outline for where our study is going. If you didn't get one, raise your hand and he'll see that you get it. The Lord has I put dates on here, but that may or may not mean anything. But this is our best effort to try to walk our way through it. At least give you some guidance to just kind of see where we're going and how you can prepare in preparation for that. You may remember that last week, as I introduced the study of the book of Daniel, I talked about the background and the breakdown. And so we spent a lot of time in just dealing with some of the historical data. There's so many history markers in the book of Daniel to kind of show us where it's pinpointed in history. And those things are significant because it tells us something of what was going on in the life of the people of God and His activity and what God was doing in their midst at the time. I closed our study last Wednesday night by just saying, man, when you read the book of Daniel, there are a lot of moving parts in it. There's two nations, the nation of Israel and Babylon in particular. We'll add the Medes and the Persians later in this 70-year period of time that Daniel will be there. We also see that there are various kings, the king of Israel, and then you've got Nebuchadnezzar. We'll meet Darius. We'll meet Cyrus in the process of all of this. There are people like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They get the primary focus, obviously, is Daniel. There are dreams and visions and schemes. There's a fiery furnace. There's a lion's den. There's angels, and there's a whole lot more. And I made the statement to you that with all of these moving parts, that there is a mover behind them all. And that mover is our sovereign God. And so, to me, that is something that is really important for us to grasp and for us to know. Seeing God powerfully at work, accomplishing His purpose and His will, and doing it in a way that, like you read about and that you see in the book of Daniel. I think it's really easy for us at times to get so focused on the details of what's going on that we lose sight of the bigger picture. And in fact, we can get so wrapped up in the details that it can overwhelm us. You probably experienced that as you read and as we studied through the book of Revelation. You'll see some of the same thing in the book of Daniel. But I think it requires of you and me to take a step back and to just be very intentional that we see the bigger picture. And the key within that bigger picture is the fact that the mover and the shaker, and I really hesitated whether I was going to say that phrase or not. It almost sounds disrespectful, but let me back it up a little bit. There's a verse in Hebrews that God says, I'm once again going to shake the heavens. And so God is a shaker. He's going to move and He's going to shake things and He is going to accomplish His purpose. It's imperative we take a step back and in the midst of everything that is going on that we realize that God is in control and that He is the one who is moving and that who is at work. So, that said, I think it's important for us to take some time and just notice what we find in Daniel in particular about the sovereignty of God. Now, the reason for that is that we need to see that God is active and see what He's doing. And I hope that as we walk our way through it, I hope you are wowed. It's one thing to just say God is sovereign and God is in control. But when you begin to see what God is doing and how He is doing it, I think you'll walk away from here tonight realizing that His sovereignty relates to you and me as well. And that just as He was in control in the events that happened in Daniel's life, and the nation of Israel, I believe that we can approach it from the same standpoint, and we can see that. So, with our lives. So tonight, I want to give you 3 ways, details about the sovereignty of God that we see within the book of Daniel. And obviously we can't look at probably everything in it, but I want to show you enough that's going to help you to grasp just how powerful and sovereign God is. The first one is this. We see the sovereignty of God in the words of the prophets. Now, you would expect me to say that. You may recall last week that we went to the prophecy of Jeremiah, and Jeremiah was a prophet during this period of time of 70 years of captivity, but his prophecy began before the nation of Israel was taken captive and that they ended up in Babylon. But we also went and looked at, just briefly, at the opening chapter of the book of Habakkuk, in which God said, through Habakkuk, that he was raising up the Chaldeans, which is another word for the Babylonians, that God was raising the Chaldeans up in order to use them to bring disciplining judgment upon his people. Now, Habakkuk's only 3 chapters long, and it is a worthy read if you want to take time to do it. Because how it opens is, Habakkuk is looking at the circumstances of the nation of Israel at his time, a number of years prior to the captivity. And Habakkuk is saying to God, where are you? I mean, look at all that's going on, all of the injustice, all of the crime, all of the things that are happening, the idolatry. And it's almost like, God, where are you? And so Habakkuk is this dialogue between God and Habakkuk, and God responds to him. And God simply says, he says, you know what? You're going to be amazed when you see what I'm doing. He said, I'm raising up this people they're evil, they're wicked, and he said, I'm going to use them to bring judgment upon my people, to discipline them with the goal of bringing them back to myself. And so I just simply show you that because all of those words came years before the captivity ever took place. And what it shows me is the sovereignty of God. It shows me just how much God was in control. You know, it is really amazing when you start reading through the prophets, minor and major prophets, you will find that it wasn't just one prophet that talked about what God was doing with the Babylonians and how he was going to use them. It was multiple. And it just reminds me of what you find in the law in the Old Testament that says that a matter is confirmed on the word of 2 witnesses. And you've got more than 2. And they are declaring the truth and they're saying it. And what they are saying is that God is in control. And that in itself should help us see something. But his sovereignty is also seen so many places in the book of Daniel. And I want to highlight some of those for you and help you to see it. So look at Daniel chapter 2. And so what I'll have to do is, because I'm jumping into a few verses to just show you things, so I'll try to give you a little bit of an update to just help you to see that. So in Daniel chapter 2, verse 20 through 23, this is Daniel's response to God revealing to him, to Daniel, about Nebuchadnezzar's dream and its interpretation. Nebuchadnezzar had this dream. He didn't understand it. It was very disturbing to him. And so he had all these people that, you know, in his kingdom that were part of his government to help him understand dreams and visions and things like that. But his catch was, I'm not telling you what the dream is. You're going to tell me the dream and you're going to tell me the interpretation. And if you don't, then you're gone. And so nobody could. And so then God reveals to Daniel, chapter 2, verse 20. Let me look at 19. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven, and Daniel said, let the name of God be blessed forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. It is he who changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to the men of understanding. It is He who reveals the profound and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness. I highlighted that. That just really, I think about all the times in our lives, not just literal darkness, but just the times where everything just seems so dark. Just the knowledge that He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with Him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and power. Even now you have made known to me what we requested of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. And so what you see in that is the sovereignty of God. Look at chapter 2, verse 44. It's a part of the vision that he's been given in its interpretation. And we'll talk about the whole thing later on. But notice verse 44. He says, in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. Inasmuch as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, and the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future, so the dream is true and its interpretation is trustworthy. And again, just the emphasis of the sovereignty of God, that His kingdom is a kingdom that will have no end. There is no rival to God. There is no rival to His kingdom. It will last forever. Look at chapter 4 and verse 17. This is a response of Nebuchadnezzar had another vision. And this is the vision where ultimately, if you've read Daniel, you know that ultimately Nebuchadnezzar becomes like a cow. He grows long hair and he's out in the pasture and the dew's on him. He's eating the grass. And so in the vision, there's this angelic watcher that gives a word to him. And part of what he says, I want you to see in verse 17. It says, this sentence is by the decree of the angelic watchers, and the decision is a command of the holy ones, in order that the living may know that the Most High is ruler over the realm of mankind, and bestows it on whom He wishes, and sets over it the lowliest of men. And again, just an emphasis, the Most High is ruler over the realm of mankind, the sovereignty of God. Look at verse 25 of the same chapter. He says, that you be driven away from mankind, and your dwelling place be with the beast of the field, and you be given grass to eat like cattle, and be drenched with the dew of heaven, and 7 periods of time will pass over you until you recognize that the Most High is ruler over the realm of mankind and bestows it on whomever He wishes. And again, a reference to the sovereignty of God. I meant to trace this out, and I'll try to remember to do it in a message to one of our study as we move forward. If I'm not mistaken, every reference to God in the book of Daniel is the God, the Most High. And it's set in contrast to references to others of the gods of the Babylonians, but even when Nebuchadnezzar speaks, he refers to him as the Most High God. It's a recognition, again, of the sovereignty of God. One more in chapter 4. Look at verse 34. So after chapter 4, verse 34, after Nebuchadnezzar returns, this is his statement. He says, but at the end of that period, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my reason returned to me, and I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored Him who lives forever. For His dominion is an everlasting dominion, and His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, but he does according to his will in the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and no one can ward off his hand or say to him, what have you done? Now, I don't know about you, but just all these references, you start reading them and looking at them, those are great phrases to use in praying back to God and just acknowledging who he is and primarily in his sovereignty. Do you get the point? God is a sovereign God. And the prophets proclaimed it. And therefore, it is worthy of our acknowledging. Second detail or way that we see the sovereignty of God is in the ways that he orchestrates the events in the book of Daniel that show his sovereignty. What I mean is that I'm going to show them to you. There are places in this book that show us how God is so actively in control in orchestrating the events that are taking place. And as I'm saying that, you know what's coming to my mind? Is the story of Jonah. Totally separate situation to a different group of people. But you think about everything that God did. It says he prepared a fish. He prepared a vine. He prepared a worm. He sent a strong east wind. Every detail of it just shows the control of God and his sovereignty as he orchestrates the events. You see, the sovereignty of God in the Bible is not just something that is said by the prophets. It is seen in the very activity of God and the things that he does. The sovereignty of God gives proof, everything that God does, orchestration of events, it gives proof to the world that God is sovereign. But the orchestrating of events gives you and me as believers, it gives us peace knowing that God is in control. Shouldn't it? It should. Now, again, how often do we get caught up in all the details that's going on around us and we don't even factor in the fact that God is in control? Everything that's happening, God is in control. He is sovereign in that. Let me show you some of the examples in Daniel. Look at chapter 1 and verse 2. It says, the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hands, speaking of Nebuchadnezzar. The very reason that Nebuchadnezzar was able to overthrow the Israelites was because God had given them into his hand. Look at verse 21 of chapter 1. It says, and Daniel continued until the first year of Cyrus the king. So what you have with that, verse 1 tells us the timing, the year of King Jehoiakim when this happened. Verse 21 of chapter 1 says how long this happened, and Cyrus was at the end of the 70 years. So you have both the beginning and the end of what was happening in Daniel's life. In all of this was how God gave them favor. He and the 3 Hebrew boys gave them favor with Nebuchadnezzar. Ultimately, the Medes would overthrow the Babylonians, and then the Persians would overthrow the Medes. And every time you had a change of government, it never changed Daniel's position. Daniel was always kept in a place of honor within the government, whatever it was, and he was not only a servant within that organization, that government, but he was a spokesman for God. And he was there because God put him there. And again, what you see is that you see the sovereignty of God within this. But look at verse 21 again. You see the reference to Cyrus the king? This is the really interesting detail of the sovereignty of God. Go to 2 Chronicles chapter 36. And remembering, the Chronicles, most likely written by Ezra, after the 70 years of captivity, after they have come back to Jerusalem. And look at verse 22. Now in the first year of Cyrus, this is 2 Chronicles 36, verse 22. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, a prophet who spoke for God, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he sent a proclamation throughout his kingdom and also put it in writing, saying, Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever there is among you of all his people, may the Lord his God be with him, and let him go up. Turn the page to Ezra chapter 1. Verse 1. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he sent a proclamation. Same words, isn't it? But what I want you to see is that this king is in place. God got rid of the Babylonians. He told his prophets and he told his people he would do it. He would raise them up, he would use them, but then he would move them out of the way. The Medes came in and moved the Babylonians out of the way. Then the Persians came in and moved the Medes out of the way. And now you have Cyrus, who is king. And Cyrus, a pagan king, gives a proclamation for the Jews to go back to Jerusalem in order to rebuild the city, rebuild the walls. And Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, that's where you find the information related to that. But he says that the Lord stirred up his spirit to bring that about. And what that simply says to me is just how sovereign God is within that. But that's not the only place that you see it. I want you to turn to Isaiah 44. And verse 28. And so before I read this, I need to tell you that Isaiah prophesied this about 150 years before Cyrus ever began his reign. Daniel 1:21 says that Daniel served until the first year of Cyrus. 2 Chronicles and Ezra says that the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus to allow the Jews to go back to Jerusalem. 150 years before, through Isaiah, the Lord said this, verse 28, Isaiah 44. He says, It is I who says to Cyrus, He is my shepherd, and he will perform all my desire. And he declares of Jerusalem, she will be built, and of the temple, your foundation will be laid. Chapter 45. Thus says the Lord to Cyrus, his anointed, whom I have taken by the right hand, to subdue nations before him, and to loose the loins of kings, to open doors before him, so that gates will not be shut. I will go before you and make the rough places smooth. I will shatter the doors of bronze and cut through the iron bars. I will give you the treasures of darkness and hidden wealth of secret places, so that you may know that it is I, the Lord, the God of Israel, who calls you by your name. For the sake of Jacob my servant and Israel my chosen one, I have also called you by your name. I have given you a title of honor, though you have not known me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. Besides me, there is no God. I will gird you, though you have not known me, that men may know that from the rising to the setting of the sun, that there is no one besides me. I am the Lord, and there is no other, the one forming light and creating darkness, causing well-being and creating calamity. I am the Lord who does all these. And that's pretty incredible, isn't it? Now, there are really smart scholars, and I say that facetiously, who say, well, there's no way that Isaiah could have, this had to have been written after the fact. Somebody after Cyrus began to rule then wrote this. No, a sovereign God said, you know what, I even know his name. He's not even on the scene yet, but I even know his name. And 150 years before it ever came about, God said, this is exactly what's going to happen. And what is that? I mean, isn't that incredible? I mean, just the knowledge to see God orchestrating events and God determining what is happening and bringing those things about. It is nothing more than the very sovereign hand of God. Third detail. So we have the words of prophets to declare the sovereignty of God. We have the ways that God orchestrates events to accomplish His purpose. And thirdly, we have the work of God on behalf of Daniel and his three friends, and that shows the sovereignty of God. I think this part is just so cool. I mean, you start reading about the three Hebrew boys and how they got in hot water. Well, they got in a hot fire is what it was. And to see God just at work in that. And then to see Daniel in the lion's den and everything that God was doing in the midst of this. What a demonstration of the sovereignty of God. Let me give you some examples. In chapter 1 in Daniel, go back there, in verse 9, it says that God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander and the officials. Look at verse 17. As for these four youths, God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature and wisdom, and Daniel even understood all kinds of visions and dreams. And so again, you see the sovereignty of God in granting favor. Remember, the king said, here's all the cuisine of the king. That's what you're supposed to eat to get you ready to be these leaders within the government. And Daniel and the three Hebrews said, no, we don't want that. Just let us have vegetables, and we will be better off than those. And so he allowed them to be able to do that, and true enough, they were healthier looking and better than the others. And so again, you see God's favor within that. In chapter 3 and verse 13, and I'm not going to take time to read all these. We'll cover all of this at a later time. But chapter 3 is the story where the three Hebrew boys are forced to bow down to this image of the king and to worship it. And they refuse. And they're given a second chance to do it. And they refuse again. They refused to bow to the pressure of what was happening and to maintain their commitment to God, knowing that the consequence was that they would be thrown into a fiery furnace. But look at verse 23, chapter 3, through verse 25. Chapter 3, verse 23. It says, but these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire, still tied up. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded and stood up in haste. He said to his officials, was it not three men we cast into the midst of the fire? They replied to the king, certainly, O king. He said, look, I see four men loosed and walking about in the midst of the fire without harm, and the appearance of the fourth is like the son of God, of the gods. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the furnace of blazing fire. He responded and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, you servants of the Most High God, and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the midst of the fire. And the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the king's high officials gathered around and saw in regard to these men that the fire had no effect on their bodies, the bodies of these men, nor was the hair of their heads singed, nor were their trousers damaged, nor had the smell of fire even come upon them. How on earth does that happen? Only by a sovereign hand of God. And His works in the midst of what was happening in the lives of these individuals. One more, chapter 6. And this is the account of Daniel in the lion's den. You remember the circumstance was his devotion would not allow him to bow to the pressure of the Babylonians. They were told nobody is to pray to anyone except to the king. And what did Daniel do? He went straight home. He did what he's always done. He bowed. He began to pray to the Most High God. And so he was accused, and he was brought before the king, knowing the consequences, that if he defied what was being told and commanded, that the consequence was that he would be thrown into the lion's den. Look at verse 16. It says, "Then the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. And the king spoke and said to Daniel, 'Your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you.' A stone was brought and laid over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and the signet ring of his nobles, so that nothing would be changed in regard to Daniel. Then the king went off to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no entertainment was brought before him, and his sleep fled from him. Then the king arose at dawn at the break of day and went in haste to the lion's den. When he had come near the den to Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. The king spoke and said to Daniel, 'Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you constantly serve, been able to deliver you from the lions?' Then Daniel spoke to the king, 'O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, inasmuch as I was found innocent before him, and also toward you, O king, I have committed no crime.'" And then look at verse 26. This is the response. He says, "For he is the living God, and enduring forever, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed, and his dominion will be forever. He delivers and rescues and performs signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has also delivered Daniel from the power of the lions." So, the sovereignty of God everywhere within this book. You see it in the words of the prophet. You see it in how God orchestrated the events and how God was in control. And you see it in His work on behalf of those who are His servants. I hope you are convinced. I mean, I'm sure you knew it. I'm sure you would have said it at the very beginning before I ever shared any of this. God is a sovereign God. But I hope you see it now more clearly than maybe you ever have before by virtue of what you read within this. Here's one thing that I saw when I was looking at all these things together. When I talk about the sovereignty of God, I'm saying God is in control. When I read that and I look at what He did in the book of Daniel, I see God in control of Daniel and his three friends. I mean, just think about everything that He did to be in control. But here's the other part of it. God is not only in control of His own people, God is in control of the pagan people all around them. He is in control of them. He is ruling and reigning and accomplishing His purpose in the lives of those kings and the events and all the circumstances. I mean, my gosh, He's even sovereign over the lions, wasn't He? And over fire. Because He is a God who is in control. And you know what? You and I have our own Nebuchadnezzars in our lives, right? We have our own Babylons seeking to press us into its mold. We may face our own fiery furnace and our own den of lions. And I'm just saying to you, as I say to myself, regardless of what those things are, God is still sovereign. So what ought that to mean to you and me? What should that mean in our lives? Let me close with just three statements to you. One is, it should give us encouragement and peace in the circumstances of our lives. I wrote this under that statement. I said, so why fret since God is in control? If God is as sovereign as I just shared with you from the prophets, from the work of God, from the ways that He orchestrates events, should that not give you and me a sense of encouragement and peace? I don't know if you listen to news very much, but I listen to it some, and I read more than I listen to it. And man, I can just get all worked up about who's going to win, who's not going to win, what's going to happen. And in the end, at the end of the day, what really is true is that God is in control. Right? And what if the most pagan of kings becomes the ruler and is in control in the kingdom of this earth? Does that mean God's not sovereign anymore? No, He is still very much in control. And therefore, I ought to have peace and encouragement because God is in control. Number two is this. It should cause us to worship the sovereign God, our sovereign God, and Him alone. You see that in Daniel's life. You see that in those three boys. I mean, they refused to worship the idol of a king. They were going to worship God, and guess where they ended up worshiping Him? And He was right there with them in a fiery furnace. Knowing that God is in control, I wrote this under that statement. So, since God is in control, I don't have to worry. Instead, I ought to worship. I can look around, and what I want to do is just worry. But if God is sovereign, I don't have to worry. I can worship, right? Because God is the one who is in control. Number 3 is this. It ought to give me encouragement and peace. It ought to lead me to worship. But it should lead you and me to be bold, courageous, unashamed, and fearless as servants of a sovereign God. God, who is sovereign, is the one that we serve. He is the one who is with us. He is the one who strengthens us, who empowers us. And therefore our response ought to be to serve Him boldly, unashamed, fearless, and with great courage. Someone once said, courage is not the absence of fear. It is doing the very thing that we fear. And that courage is coming from God to be able to do it. So why is that important? What does that have to do? I thought we were going to study about end time stuff in the book of Daniel. We are. But we're living today in light of the future, and you and I must never forget that God is sovereign and He is in control. And we're going to read it. We're going to get to chapter 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And all these visions and all these things that God's going to lay out before Daniel that have to do with future events. We're going to see it. And what you're going to see is that God is in control, that He is sovereign. Man, may that help you and me to just lay down tonight and put our heads on our pillows and go sound asleep, because God, He never sleeps, He never slumbers. We're never out of His sight. There's no darkness that is too dark that He can't still see where we are. In fact, He's right there with us. And hey, I'm preaching to myself, okay? To need to remember that God is God alone and that He is sovereign. We use this phrase, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. But think about that for just a minute. Think about all the kings and presidents and rulers of this earth. Who is the king of all of them? God. Of all the lords and false gods and all that kind of stuff, who is Lord, sovereign over every bit of that? God. And we must never lose sight of that. And don't get so caught up in the details. Take a step back and see the bigger picture and see a sovereign God that is in control of all that's happening. Let's pray together. God, thank You for Your word. Thank You for the encouragement that You give us, God. Man, what hope. Forgive us, God. Forgive me where I can get so wrapped up in details and be consumed with fear and worry, as opposed to realizing there's no need to worry. I just need to worship because God is in control. Lord, thank You for showing us that. Help us, God, to live by it. Let it impact how we live our lives. And may we be consumed with peace, God, in the midst of it. Help us to live today in light of the future with hope, with encouragement, because You are sovereign and in control. To Your honor and glory we ask this. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, thank you for being here tonight. If you have a little bit of time after right now we're done, to get ready for Bible school, we need to get all of the pulpit furniture off the platform and move it out. Katie and them are somewhere around.